What's happening, Lisa Oliver? It's Robert Plank. So you're saying that you already make a substantial income from your fiction books, and you've done that for 3 years. Podcasts are what you're interested in reaching new audiences. So, all right. So a couple questions. First of all, what software do you need? Are there places like YouTube where we can host stuff for free? And do you require a specific plugin to host podcasts for your existing audience? So three great questions, and let's sort of clear some of this stuff out and look at some of these questions. So let me make sure I get everything for you. So we say podcast software, recording and editing, and then host the podcast for free on YouTube. Answer is not on YouTube. And then podcasting plugin for WordPress. So you're kind of asking all the right questions. So if we search for Lisa Oliver, whoops, Lisa Oliver. So you have, see, Lisa Oliver's page. So you have this. All right. So you have like Kindle erotic romances and stuff with like the wolves and all that. Cool. And yeah, you're not kidding. You got good ranking or good reviews. Check out the ranking. Awesome stuff. Cool, cool. So I just choosing around and won all the ranking, all those reviews. Cool. So all right. So first of all, let me just kind of get to these questions. So as far as the recording software, so there's a couple things. Is we in our Podcast Crusher course, uh, podcastcrusher.com. I'm not going to open up a program and kind of play around, but Audacity is a free one, and there's basically only three things that you can really do in Audacity. Like you can like trim and cut and make volume louder or quieter. So one thing I would just kind of recommend you going forward is don't think too much about editing a podcast. If you say if you stop for a second, it doesn't really matter. And I honestly believe that your first podcast episode shouldn't have any music, shouldn't have any cuts, shouldn't have anything. Just literally like hit the button and start recording and just talk. And then when you're have about 5 minutes in there, then stop recording, and that gives you your very first episode. So use Audacity free. And then something else I kind of want to throw out there is if you want to get super fancy with the editing, and since you say you're making income already from your books, Fiverr for the podcast editing. So I haven't looked too much into this, but if I go on Fiverr and if I search, I'm going to search either like podcast editing or audio editing, right? So I mean, yeah, we've got we've got 1,000, awesome. So yeah, and the trick with Fiverr, if you're kind of never used it as a buyer, or if you're kind of overwhelmed, like they kind of say, well, do so $5 for 30 minutes, and so you can just shoot them and just give them your instructions. And if you're not sure about, okay, there's like dollar minutes, what you can do is click on this contact me and just shoot this person what you have. Just say, I see that you provide podcast editing. Here's my episode that I have. Here's what I want to do to it, right? Like if you really want to add music later, you just say, here's the stuff, and then give it back to me. And so for $5 to save you from having to either learn a piece of software or buy a piece of software, or even waste 20 minutes or 10 minutes every time, you can just go on Fiverr and just hire this person for $5 to do any kind of that fancy editing, intro and outro, and all that. And so Fiverr is a great place to do this. And so on Fiverr, once you get fancy, right? Once you record a couple episodes on Fiverr, you can have someone record like your theme song. Like if we say podcast intro, I'm not sure if I quite remember the person that I usually use. Uh, it might be that Josh McClellan. I'm not sure actually. Yeah, I want to say Josh McClellan. I'm not gonna start listening to stuff, but I know I know his name if I heard it. But so yeah, you just kind of, and you can listen. These ones that have a play symbol, you can just kind of play that, and you can try out different people's voices. So Fiverr is a great resource for that. So Audacity and Fiverr. Don't overthink the editing though. Just get the recording in there. And if you listen to a lot of podcast episodes, they're not super fancy about the editing. They're not NPR or anything like that. So as far as hosting the podcast, well, I'm not going to I'm not going to reveal that, but basically, the place that we have you host inside our course is $7 a month. And you don't want I don't like doing it for free. I don't know how to do it on YouTube. SoundCloud has limitations. I really like the ability to use a podcasting service for a couple of reasons. One reason is that if you use like a special place that hosts podcast episodes, first of all, they're not going to limit your bandwidth, they're not going to slow you down, they're not going to charge you extra if you happen to have a really popular episode that gets like 10,000 downloads, they're not going to charge you any extra money for that. And then what ends up being really cool is that you can then kind of see some different graphs and things like that. So like right here, I can see that. So this episode, this podcast I have has 152 total listens to it, and then I can see all these different stats that I wouldn't have otherwise been able to kind of unpack if I hosted it somewhere else. So here's what I can do: is I can see what are my most popular episodes, right? I can sort. I can say, okay, well, some of these episodes have 2,000 plus downloads, and these three are to be expected because these are like the earlier ones. But then once I kind of scroll down, I can say, okay, well, some of these ones about Facebook are popular. Some of these things about membership sites are popular, and I can start to kind of get some interesting ideas here, right? I can go to this graph and I can say, oh, well, what were some what were some high traffic days and why was that? So, this podcast, on a good day gets a couple hundred, but I mean, on some slow days, it might only get 100 or so listens. But if this traffic spikes up here, I can click on that and it will tell me on just that one day what were my most popular episodes that day. So this person, Mike Metzger, I had him on, and this might have been the day that the podcast episode came out. I might have to do some kind of detective work, but I know that this guest in particular ran some paid ads to our episode together. So let me show you that real quick. So if I bring up Facebook, and I remembered that that super popular guest was Mike Metzger, and I'll just search my name, I'll search his name, and we can see that on March 15th, he made, not even a paid ad, right? He just posted on his fan page, and he got us 49 likes, a bunch of comments, and then I think he, maybe I can't find it if I search posts, maybe. I know that this person has promoted a couple different times. Okay, so maybe he posted the free one, and then later on he posted the ran the ad for a while. But so this is the kind of thing where I can get these kinds of answers about how well my podcast is doing that you wouldn't have otherwise had if you hosted it for free or you tried something else, right? I can look at how well my podcast is doing. I can see month to month, is my podcast growing or dying? Lots of sort of insights like that. But basically, I'm not going to tell you what we use to host, but don't use YouTube, don't use SoundCloud, don't use Amazon, don't use your own web host for all of these reasons, right? Because it's going to be slow or they might charge you more. Just use a special podcast host. As far as the podcasting plugin, I'm also not going to tell you that because I mean, I've got to have some sort of secrets, right? All I will say though is that what makes this really kind of easy here is that when we post a new episode, right? I go and I post the title, I post all the stuff. It's easy to post a podcast because it just adds this extra spot underneath, right? There's the place for the post on its own, do the category, all that stuff. But down below, now we have this place to enter the MP3 audio file, right? And so that's the difference between just a regular blog post and a podcast episode is you just paste in this MP3 audio file, and then that's what gets you there, right? And so I hope that those kind of answers help. That don't overthink all this stuff, right? Don't overthink the editing. You don't have to do anything fancy there. As far as the podcast host, don't go with a free one, but don't go with some super expensive thing. And then the podcasting plugin for WordPress, we use one of the most popular ones. But some of the sort of second place, third place ones that are missing some huge features, and they don't, and this is really important, they don't give you those sort of stats, those charts and graphs where you can really unpack things sort of like I showed you there. And so kind of one final thing that kind of I don't know, that kind of came to mind is, let me try to find your page again, right? So here's something interesting is you have all these titles, right? What I would do, well, I mean, so as far as like ideas for stuff, every time you come up with a new book, I would definitely record a podcast episode reviewing your own book, talking about your own book, right? I would record a podcast episode that talks about like why you got started with this romance novel stuff, and what makes you different, what makes you stand out as far as all that kind of stuff goes. And then one other thing I want to do before we kind of sign off here, I'm trying to I'll minimize that. I'm trying to bring up my phone um, to show my screen on there, but it's like taking its sweet time. Let me try to stop and reopen my program here. So if we restart and try to mirror the phone, there we go. So we're mirroring the phone, all right. And so basically what we can do here is if we search our podcasting app for Kindle, we can see that there are a lot of different shows that you can kind of appear on, right? So the Kindle Chronicles appear on that podcast, and share, if this comes up, see how there's like individual authors on here. And I'm also sort of curious if you've already done that. Maybe I'm kind of preaching to the converted here. So we'll see what comes up for you. All right. So yeah, I mean, what you want is if you search your name on iTunes, I mean, search your name anywhere, right? Amazon, Google, you want to be the one that comes up. So if we search Lisa Oliver Kindle, okay. So what I would do is I would find podcasts about Kindle books, podcasts about writing, podcasts about, so is this Kindle love stories? Is that like for romance? I would just look into a couple things. I would look into some of these shows for you to appear on somewhere down the line. I would make your own podcast talking about each one of your books, right? Each of those episodes can be one of your books. I would record an episode about sort of different obstacles you overcame, like, why is self-publishing better than going with a publisher? How do you overcome writer's block? How do you overcome bad reviews? How do you market your book? Stuff like that. And then I would contact these names. See, I would contact these people like Liz Talley. I mean, I'm guessing that you know someone in here, right? There's someone you must know, and have them hop on your show, and then that way they can kind of share their breakthroughs, and then in the long term, then you can hop on some of these other shows, because guess what? If you contact whoever this is that sells Kindle love stories, you can say, well, Cindy Kirk's been on my show just like your show. Melinda Lee's been on my show just like your show. I mean, heck, you could have the host of whatever this show is on your show, and then kind of that's a new person that you're talking to that you otherwise wouldn't have spoken to. So lots of possibilities there. I hope that kind of gets the things going, but I think that the big thing is, don't overthink it. It doesn't have to be that complicated as far as like music and stuff like that. If you want to build up to that, if you want to ramp up to that after a handful of episodes, great, but let's kind of crawl before we run, and get the first episode out there. So Podcast Crusher, Audacity for editing, use a separate podcast host to show you which one, and then we also show you the podcasting plugin what we use, and that is also free. So just use the tools that are there. Don't try to make it complicated. Don't try to do it yourself. I hope that helps. Robert Plank, and so good talking to you, Lisa. Hope to hear from you again soon. Podcastcrusher.com. Thanks for writing in. Bye now.